So the river analogy is about capacity. Sometimes people think that healing trauma means we're going to feel good all the time, that we'll just have joy and we won't have the other facets of life. And a river has river banks. Sometimes when we feel compressed or stressed or we're carrying a lot of tension or trauma in our systems, those riverbanks are narrow and the amount of water that can run through them is very little. It's like a trickling stream. And then when we have outer stimulus, a lot of our energy gets veered off into these whirlpools, which in somatic experiencing we call a vortex of trauma or a vortex of healing. So, the river's going along and then something happens and then there we are and all of our energy is siphoned off and we're taken off of the course of where the river wants to go, which is, a healthy river. There's going to be obstacles. There's going to be rocks and beaver dams and uh, animals and then, the water flows around it. So the process of healing trauma is shoring up those riverbanks so that it's not so easy for us to spin off into the vortex of trauma. And the vortex of trauma could look like a syndrome, like anxiety or depression or an autoimmune condition or a behavioral reaction, that all of a sudden we don't find ourselves just defaulting into that vortex. And then our riverbanks actually get wider and the flow of the water gets stronger because what we can quote unquote handle or what's in the realm of our capacity to be with without short circuiting into those responses just gets much wider.
Mm.
So, the one other interesting part of that is that most of the time in the spiritual world and the self help and development world, we think that we have to learn how to be with difficulty. The biohacking world is all about like, you got to learn how to be with the tough stuff. But actually, what we know from healing trauma is we also have to learn how to deal with what's good and feel pleasure and be able
Mm.
to hold on to the things that feel good. We actually can't help someone heal trauma unless they have a capacity to stick with something that feels good in their system. Otherwise, we just go with them into their trauma vortex.
It's really interesting that whole piece about we need this capacity to feel good because when I'm as I've noticed over the years as I pay attention to my body, I notice that like something that feels really good can feel as weird and unsettling as something that feels really bad. And it's interesting because it's like because you describe the nervous system and arousal, and I think of that the way like something feels so good, it can when I zoom into my body and I get into that, and we'll talk about that whole idea of that felt sense. It's like it's just as it is like a feeling of like arousal, like oh, there's this, and and I know that a lot of us try to kind of get back to back to normal, right? When something or what's familiar, when something feels really good too.
Definitely. And that can be feeling good sexually. That could be making an amount of money that you've never made or getting an offer. Even just right now, I have this amazing project that I got selected for, and I'm procrastinating about it. And I'm procrastinating because I want to get it right. And there's some perfection in there. And then there's also the fear of not getting it right and the exposure. So, novelty can register as activating. It's not just learning how to roll with or tolerate discomfort. It's like, well, how can we be with each other in victories? Like how
Mm,
can we celebrate with each other? It's so complicated right now because the world is ever more framed in threatening ways, whether it's the planet or how we are together racially or how we are together with sex and gender. And so sometimes we can feel like, well, we don't deserve to feel good, or I'm
mm,
in a white body, I have privilege, I'm cisgendered, and so therefore I shouldn't feel bad, but I also shouldn't feel that good. And
mm,
actually, maybe
mhm.
I should feel bad because maybe if I demonstrate that I feel bad, that's going to demonstrate some kind of solidarity, or I'm going to distribute the amount of suffering there is. My hope is that there is a way that we can both focus on being well enough to be available in these conversations, but also continue to, from a body perspective and a felt sense animal perspective, we can sense what other animals, including human animals, are experiencing, and that will come into a greater level of wholeness as well. So we really do need, I call it in the book, a hold it moment, which is, and you know, those people in your life that can hold it with you. You know, I have a friend who's in her 70s, and she was able to buy an apartment for the first time, and she was a stay-at-home mom and raised 3 children, and her husband was the breadwinner. And so it's like a really big deal for her that she bought an apartment on her own. But when she wrote me, she said, I knew you could celebrate this with me, and I don't know what it is, but I feel like I can't really tell my peers,
Mm.
because it's that other concept in the book of fitting in, of like, oh, it could be dangerous if I stand out. And so my system is telling me, no, go back, be the same, don't be too different, or else there's going to be a consequence to it. So we definitely need those people in our lives that can just see us for who we are and celebrate the good things with us.
And it all circles back to this idea of capacity. You were talking about the river, like we want to widen those borders of the river. Sometimes I think of capacity in the terms of like comfort zone, like, that kind of growth is like outside of our comfort zone. And we want to expand that comfort zone, that kind
Yeah,
of
and some people
capacity.
call it, like, in somatic experiencing, a lot of people call it a window of tolerance. People
Mm-hmm.
might have seen that in polyvagal theory, but I don't like the word tolerance, because
Mm.
tolerate is something that's kind of passive, and most women go through life tolerating a whole bunch of things that shouldn't really be tolerable. So I like to think a bit of a window of presence. How much can you stay present
Mm.
to without getting kicked out into one of those eddies? And it's perceptible in each other. So, another way I talk about it is a platform of okayness. So, the big waves come in life. Everyone listening has had them this year. There's not anyone who hasn't had a big, their boat's been seriously rocked, or the canoe that you're on in the river is like, whoa. But to what extent does that stress become trauma is how we're able to metabolize it and digest it, and
Mhm.
the amount of platform of okayness, or our margin of capacity, or our window of presence, to be available to life in spite of or in addition to all of the big waves.
Catch new episodes of the Mindful Mama podcast and other free resources, including the Mindful Mom Guide at mindfulmamamentor.com. You can listen to every back catalog episode, including interviews with Dr. Dan Siegel, Ianla Van Zant, Sharon Salzberg, and get meditations, join our private Facebook group, and more. Go to mindfulmamamentor.com now. I'll see you there.